When you suffer the worst series sweep in franchise history by run differential, it's time to make some changes. What will they be for the Mets? We'll talk about it on today's show.
You are Locked On Mets, your daily New York Mets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello to all you amazing Mets fans. You're watching Locked On Mets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your host, Ryan Finkelstein. I've been covering the New York Mets on this show since the 2019 season. This is the only podcast that covers the Mets 7 days a week throughout the regular season. If you want to find some of my written work, you can do so over at justbaseball.com, where I work as the managing editor. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Right now, new customers can get $150 in bonus bets when your first $5 bet wins. Now, this weekend was about as bad of baseball as you're ever going to see your team play. The Mets did not do anything well. They didn't hit well. They didn't pitch well from their rotation or their bullpen. There was individual guys that maybe didn't have horrible weekends. A guy like Brandon Waddell stands out as a guy that performed pretty well, 3 strong innings on Saturday. You might be able to look and say, maybe Jeff McNeil had a good game on Sunday. You might find a guy here or there, but largely this team just played awful baseball, and they have been playing very bad baseball for multiple weeks now, which has taken them from this big cushion they had where they were handedly leading the National League East to all of a sudden being back in this division and at this point looking very vulnerable as a team that you can't just say, the New York Mets are going to be a playoff team. I still believe that to be true. But at this very moment today, there's a lot of Mets fans that don't. And you know that front office right now with the Mets off day, the players are off, but that front office is probably working overtime, trying to figure out what can they possibly do to spark this team. So let's go through every facet of the team. And we're going to start with the lineup. The lineup that scored, 4 runs over the weekend? What is wrong with this team offensively? Well, if you look at their batting average with runners in scoring position this year, they're hitting .217. That is the worst mark in the National League, second worst mark in Major League Baseball, behind, I believe, the Chicago White Sox, who are clearly not a very good team. So what can the Mets do to fix that? Is there an approach issue? What's going on that has got this team to the point where they've been just so awful, stringing together hits, getting that clutch RBI when they need it? What's happening? It's really hard to pinpoint, but at times like this, what do fans call for? Fire the hitting coaches. And I have pushed back on that notion for weeks now because I just did not believe that the New York Mets would go there. As I sit here today on June 30th, if the Mets fired the hitting coaches today or tomorrow, I would be happy, I think. And I would not defend Chavez. And honestly, this entire time, I haven't really been defending Eric Chavez and Jeremy Barnes. It is funny when only Eric Chavez gets the blame when Jeremy Barnes is as much of the hitting coach as Chavez is, but Chavez, obviously a more prominent name. But I haven't defended those guys, but what I've said is you really don't know what impact a hitting coach is having. It's so hard to tell. The Mets fired Chili Davis. What year was that? At 21? I don't think it sparked their offense by any stretch of the imagination. If I remember correctly, that team was a bad offensive team, wire to wire. They brought it was a Hugh Quattlebaum or whatever, and then Donnie Stevenson, and that was a fun year. I love that I've now gotten to the point where I've covered so many Mets teams that there's just like all these random quirky things that'll pop up of, I remember when that happened. But that didn't do anything. Sometimes it can work, but that's a last-ditch effort thing. And the reason why I never thought it was going to happen, not because I thought that Eric Chavez is an incredible hitting coach. I just can't see the Mets putting that blame on the coaches and getting to a point where they're scapegoating Chavez and Barnes and thinking that's going to fix anything. I think they're more a type of front office, a type of organization now that wants to stay insular, that wants to work together to solve the problems. So I really don't think it's going to happen. And then, further confirmation of that is Andy Martino reported it's not going to happen, that they are not going to fire the hitting coaches. All right, so let's look at the individual performers. Last 2 weeks, who's been swinging the bat well? Juan Soto's obvious. 7 home runs over the last couple weeks, 311 average, 1.224 OPS. He's been unbelievable. Best hitter in baseball, you could say, over the last couple weeks. Brandon Nimmo is hitting 308, 368, 481. So he's getting on base over a 350 clip, hitting over 300, got some slug mixed in there as well, and 849 OPS. That is very solid numbers for Brandon Nimmo. He has really found a home in that 2-hole. We have Ronnie Mauricio at a 668 OPS, and I only mention him because every other hitter in the Mets lineup has an OPS below 660. Every single hitter. Not even someone, like a Hayden Sanger went 2 for 4. Like, no, every single hitter in this lineup has been brutal. But here's the guy that really stands out. Francisco Lindor. This team goes with Lindor. When Lindor is hitting, when Lindor is playing well, the team takes off. And when he's bad, they tank. Francisco Lindor in his last 14 games played is hitting 143, 183 on base, 286 slug, a 469 OPS. He's batting leadoff, putting up those numbers. You can't blame everything on Lindor, but he's the tone setter that is not setting the tone. And then you look at Tyrone Taylor and Luis Severino. Both those guys are hitting below the Mendoza line as well, getting a good amount of playing time. Pete Alonso has homered once in the last 14 games played. What changes can be made, though, to fix the lineup other than, hey, your best player has got to play better? I mean, that's an obvious one. So what can the Mets do differently? Well, they sent down Francisco Alvarez. Mark Vientos came off the injured list, and they kept Ronnie Mauricio over Jared Young. I think they've already made their moves, and I think they found a lineup this weekend that they want to actually see. Get some extended run before the break. And that's Jeff McNeil in center field, and that's playing Ronnie Mauricio and Brett Beatty in the field with Mark Vientos DHing. That is the group. And I don't think they're going to do anything but hope that those guys start to hit. And I don't think that is actually a bad plan. I think that's the best the Mets can do right now. Lindor, Nimmo, Soto, Alonso, McNeil. That 1 through 5 to me are guys that at the end of the season, I think the numbers are going to be there. And they've all had good stretches at points this season. And now that Soto is amazing, if Pete Alonso gets back to being even 80% of what he was when Soto wasn't amazing, and you can say the same thing for Lindor, Nimmo keeps doing what he's doing, and Jeff McNeil keeps doing what he's doing, that's a good 1 through 5 of veterans. Okay, I'm fine with that part of the lineup. The bottom of the lineup, yeah, a lot of question marks. Mark Vientos has to figure it out. And if not, the Mets are going to have some moves to make at the deadline. Francisco Alvarez was sent down. Guess what? He's homered in his last 2 games in Syracuse. And on Sunday, he doubled as well. Homer and a double, 2 for 5. So Alvarez is starting to swing it, looking more like the old Alvarez when it comes to his stance a little bit. But can you blame Jeremy Barnes and Eric Chavez for Francisco Alvarez? Fans are, because of those things that came out about how Alvarez changed his approach. But this offseason, Francisco Alvarez went to hitting coaches recommended by JD Martinez, completely overhauled his swing, and then he broke his hand. And so I think for Alvarez, I don't think this is the current Mets hitting coaches that are the problem. I think it's a guy that was trying to make a lot of changes, and all of the repetition that he had built up with those changes got thrown out of whack when he got hurt. So going in Syracuse, maybe going back to your old swing, whatever feels natural to you, might be the best way to get Francisco Alvarez to at least hit the mistakes like Francisco Alvarez and get back to being, it's funny, what a Mike Zunino was. You could almost say what a Cal Raley was, but now Cal Raley is just an awesome hitter overall. But a catcher that hopefully can provide good defense for you and run into home runs every couple of games. That's what you want from Alvarez at this point, and they did the right thing to try to get him there. Jesse Winker just began his first game in his rehab assignment. He just started on Sunday in Brooklyn, got 3 at-bats, walked once, hit an RBI double, got hit by a pitch. I think Jesse Winker is going to obviously need a couple weeks of at-bats, but I think he'll be good to go right after the All-Star break, and Alvarez will as well. So if that's the case, you have 2 weeks to make a decision on Ronnie Mauricio, Brett Beatty, or Mark Vientos, although you can't really cut Vientos because he didn't have any options. So I don't know what they would do if that case, if Beatty and Mauricio both took off. I guess they'd probably just ditch Jankowski, cut Vientos' playing time, and not have a speedster on the bench. I think that's probably what they would do, and that's fine. So that's where the Mets are at with their offense. There's no trade to make. There's no calling up Jet Williams from Double-A, although I did think about that for a little bit before I did the show today. I'm like, would that make sense? I looked back at Michael Conforto's numbers in 2015. I don't think it makes sense, but there's no other move to be made. I don't think there's a trade to be made. I don't think there's a call up. What you have is what you got. You need Vientos to get some at-bats under his belt off of this injury to see. And you're watching Beatty and Mauricio trying to figure themselves out at the big league level. And I have kind of liked the at-bats from Beatty recently, and Mauricio is definitely improving as well. So to me, this lineup, it starts with Francisco Lindor, and if he starts to hit, hopefully everybody will behind him. But I don't think there's any crazy changes that are going to be made here. I think the Mets are going to get some real, reinforcements after the All-Star break that could help them close out this month. And then what they learn about Mauricio, Beatty, Vientos, Alvarez, all these guys will inform what they try to do at the deadline. But I'll tell you what, I've been researching this trade deadline and trying to find who's going to be on the block for just baseball. There's not a lot of bats on the table. There's really not a lot of players on the table until we know who's going to be sellers. But bats in particular are going to be at a premium. So the Mets might have to stay internal the whole way through, and that's going to require just some incredible progression by some of the guys in-house. So I don't see any change that can be made there. Is there a change that can be made that can help this bullpen? We're going to go there next. First, though, quick word from our sponsors. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Summer sports are in full swing, and whether you're all about baseball under the lights, golf on the green, or high-stakes soccer action, FanDuel is the best way to make every game even more exciting. You're already following the action. Why not make it a little more thrilling? With FanDuel, you can get in on the game while your friends are getting sunburned at the beach. I've been using FanDuel to track my favorite matchups, and the app keeps it fresh with daily promotions and fun ways to bet. It's easy to use, fast to pay out, and makes even regular season games feel like must-watch events. Whether I'm playing a same-game parlay or watching a bet right into the ninth inning, FanDuel makes it feel like I'm part of the action. If you're new to FanDuel, new customers can bet just $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if your first bet wins. Open the FanDuel app today or visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get started. If you're watching on YouTube today, do me a favor and hit that subscribe button. Help us get closer to our next goal of 14,000 subscribers. Now let's talk about this Mets bullpen. Over the past week, Jose Budo, Reed Garrett, Edwin Diaz, and Ryan Stanek each had 3 appearances. None of them gave up a run. So that part of your bullpen, the high leverage guys, looks good. That's half a bullpen there. That's 4 arms. Daniel Nunez came off of, not the Angels. He came back to the big league roster, had 1 good outing, 1 great outing where he pitched 2 scoreless innings, struck out 4, looked like Daniel Nunez of 2024, and then a clunker on Sunday. I think you got to give him more run and see. I don't think you should rush him right back down to the minor leagues. The other thing is the Mets literally have nobody that they can bring back up right now because everybody over the past 15 days has been cycled through the roster at some point. Every arm that is optionable that's on the 40-man roster has been up and back down and is not eligible to return unless someone gets hurt. So unless they want to go Billy Epler and Phantom IL somebody, they're kind of locked into this bullpen. So Nunez will stay. Brandon Waddell, 2 good outings, especially the one on Saturday where he went 3 scoreless. To me, Waddell is staying. There's no reason to make a move there. He should be the lefty in the bullpen for now, and hopefully you get Brooks Raley back soon. That's 6 of 8 arms. The other 2 right now that are currently on the roster as I'm recording this, you have Dickie Lovelady, who had 2 appearances this past week on 2 separate contracts because he was cut, cleared waivers, elected free agency, and ended up back on the Mets. And then you have Huascar Brazoban. Lovelady, maybe he stays. Who knows? Brazoban. His ERA this past week was 94.50. Not 9.45. No. 94 runs is what he would average over 9 innings pitched. 94 and a half runs. My bad. He only got 2 outs. He allowed 2 hits. He walked 5, and all 7 of those base runners came around to score. In the month of June, his ERA is 13.50. 13.50 for a guy that had a sub-2 ERA entering the month of June. Across 9 appearances in June, he's walked 12. All year prior to that, he walked 9. He has completely lost command, and guess what? He has options. He has options. So if I'm in that front office, David Stearns or anybody in that front office today, if you're, a fan of Locked On Mets, you like to listen to, get a fan's perspective on things. Why don't you say, hey, remember he has options, and let's send this guy down because he is absolutely brutal? If anybody else pitches on Saturday, you never know. The Mets might have won that game. It was close until Braziban came in. And then you walked the world. He's got to be off this roster. That's the first tangible change that can be made. Braziban needs to go to Syracuse and get his head on straight. And maybe he just needs a break. Maybe he just has a tired arm. Maybe you send him down to Syracuse, or maybe he is hurt. Maybe he's got arm fatigue of some kind. Perfect. Send him down. Bring somebody up. I like Chris Devanski. I like Austin Warren. Bring one of those guys up for him. There has to be some form of injury for Braziban. Can you please phantom him? The guy, I feel like the guy just needs to not pitch for like 2 weeks and then maybe ramp back up and he'll be fine, because whatever has happened to him, he's lost it. And then you have Max Kranick, who's actually eligible to come off the IL, but I don't think he's just going to parachute in here. So again, there's not a single pitcher on the 40 that can come up unless there's an injury. So I'm saying they should send Braziban down, but if there's nobody that come up to replace him, what do? There's 2 arms that stand out to me. One of them would be a guy that you could add to the roster and dump him whenever you wanted to. That's Rico Garcia, who's been with the Mets all year. I do recall on his stuff going back to spring training, I think he throws pretty hard, but don't quote me on that. What I will tell you is a 2.25 ERA over his last 8 innings pitched in Syracuse, 9 strikeouts to 2 walks. So he's throwing the ball pretty well. He is a guy you can select his contract, bring him up. The other guy, though, that actually intrigues me more is Alex Carrillo. This is a 28-year-old who was just promoted up to AAA after starting the season in AA. He was signed out of Indy ball last year by the Mets. This is a guy that throws hard. Across 19 1/3 innings pitched in AA, he struck out 30. Now, his ERA was over 4, but he gave up 6 runs in his first 4 appearances, only 3 earned runs over his final 11 appearances before he got promoted up to AAA. And since then, he's worked 3 scoreless innings, no walks, 5 strikeouts. He pounds the strike zone. He is clearly having no issue setting down batters. He's got swing and miss stuff. If it was me, if it was my team, what I would be doing, I'd be adding Carrillo to the 40-man roster. I would dump Tyler Zuber because he hasn't pitched well. And you have to dump somebody. I think, to me, of the arms on the 40, that's probably the guy I would dump. And then I would send Braziban down. The good news is, after the All-Star break, here's another reinforcement. Brooks Raley very well could be ready. He is now up in AA. He pitched his first 3 appearances on his rehab assignment in St. Lucie. Each of them was the same. Gave up 1 hit, struck out 2, a scoreless inning. Now he got 5 outs in AA. He allowed just 1 hit, no walk, struck out 2. So far across his rehab, he's pitched 4 2/3 innings pitched, has not issued a walk. He has struck out 8. Now, this is the first time he faced AA competition, and I'm sure they're going to want to give him a couple appearances in AA and then bring him up to AAA and have him get some appearances there. But if he spends this week in AA, next week in AAA, I think there is every chance that Brooks Raley might check off enough boxes that coming out of the break, or maybe they give him one more weekend in the minor leagues after that, he could be good to go. So that is going to help the bullpen in a very significant way. I really think that this is going to be a huge thing for this pen if they get the Brooks Raley we saw over the past couple seasons prior to the Tommy John. So if he's right, that's amazing, and that can help. For now, though, the only real change I think the Mets should be making is they should be getting rid of Braziban, and then they should see what they have in Carrillo, in my opinion, just because there's a chance you might catch lightning in a bottle. He's thrown the ball really well. He's got good stuff. I'd try it. But all of that leads me to our final segment, which is the real problem. I probably buried the lead a little bit. What can the Mets do with this rotation, and is there a world where they could trade for Luis Severino to help it. And mind you, Sevy has not thrown the ball well lately. He just got rocked by the Yankees, but it might be a better fit than what the Mets have. So I'm going to go through all of that here in just a minute. If you're an everydayer that's always tuning into the show, make sure you become a Locked On Mets insider. It's our texting service where you get updates from me anytime news breaks on the Mets. You can ask me questions anytime. Take part in our Locked On Mets sign photo giveaways. You get a lineup graphic sent to your phone each day so you know who's in the starting lineup without ever having to go on social media. If you want to be a Locked On Mets insider, find a link in the episode description. Go to subtext.com/LockedOnMets. So the Mets starting rotation is the beginning of the issues that have stemmed for this roster. It all starts with Kodai Senga going down, Tyler McGill going down, and now Griffin Canning. Those injuries have really knocked out the foundation of what this team had been all season, which was a group that was carried by their rotation. And now you just don't know what you're going to get every fifth day, especially with David Peterson's recent struggles. And looking at the way the Mets have set up their pitching this week, I think the front office believes that he's a little bit fatigued, because they're going Holmes in the first start. No surprise there. I think he's on an extra day's rest anyway. So Clay Holmes on Tuesday, Blade Tidwell on Wednesday on 4 days rest. Top pitching prospects typically might get an extra day, not Tidwell in this case. Now, I also would think he might be on a pitch count though, so you might only get 75 pitches out of Blade Tidwell. The Mets might feel better about that anyway though, because you might not want a guy like Tidwell who could be prone to a blow up, seeing a lineup a third time through. I think you're probably trying to get him through the lineup twice and getting out of Dodge if he does have a lead. And then it's David Peterson on Thursday on 5 days rest. So that's one thing they're trying to change here. This will allow David Peterson to have an extra day, I think pretty much the rest of the way out here. So they can set that up, especially because they're going to at some point slide Sean Manaea back into this rotation. So you look at how it shapes up for the week. Again, Holmes, Tidwell, Peterson, Blackburn, Montas, back to Holmes. And then you could go with, Manaea, Peterson next week. And he would pitch, actually have 6 days that turn then. Or you can go Peterson, Manaea, but then he would pitch twice in the week. So again, I think getting Peterson extra rest is part of the Mets plan right now. I think they want him to start one game in each of the last 2 weeks, get to the All-Star break, get a lot of rest, and hopefully come back looking like the guy that was an all-star until his last 2 starts. Okay, so his spot in the rotation is not in jeopardy. Neither is Clay Holmes. He's actually thrown the ball well still. The hope is that Sean Manaea will replace Blade Tidwell for the next turn in the rotation. Tidwell's going to start on Wednesday, but then he would go down. And then you're going to have Manaea come up hopefully the following week. That leaves you with Montas and Blackburn. Now, Montas had a great first start, and then he had a brutal inning in his start on Sunday. Couldn't put batters away. Fastball command wasn't quite there. Had a chance to get out of it, though, because there was a couple of line drives, one at Pete Alonso, one a diving play by Brett Beatty. So there was 2 outs, 2 runners in scoring position, because in between those lineouts, there was a walk and a double. And Brian Hayes was up. Talked about on the broadcast, they threw, I think, 5 straight sliders, so that was a mistake there. But the slider that Brian Hayes hit was actually executed well. It was off the plate, had good break to it. It's just Hayes was sitting on it, reached out over, flared it into the outfield. That extended the inning, and then Montas gave up a couple home runs. But after that, he pitched pretty well. Second inning, couple ground balls, found holes, sack, fly, run, but that was it, really. He got a double play ball to get out of that jam, struck out 4 of the final 8 batters that he faced. Should have retired all but one of those batters, but Ronnie Mauricio made an error. Still, I'm not overly concerned about Montas right now. He's going to stay in this rotation, and I think he's shown enough through 2 starts that you can hope for some positive things moving forward. Blackburn, I've lost all faith in, but I will say the Mets are going to use the excuse that the rain delay really messed him up, and it's a fair one. He didn't pitch for an hour and a half, goes back out there. The first inning, he looked good. Second inning, goes back out, gives up 5 straight hits. But I will say, getting rid of Blackburn and plugging someone else in that rotation is going to be huge. Now, when they get Manaea back, they won't be able to do that. So until you get Senga back or make a trade, you are stuck with Paul Blackburn unless they decide to bring up Nolan McLean. But there also is a pitcher that the Mets are very familiar with that the A's can't wait to trade. That is literally what has been reported, and that is Luis Severino. And they're mad at him because he has commented publicly about the fact that he's pitching on a minor league mound in terrible field conditions. And that's why his splits this year have been pretty drastic. At home, 6.79 ERA. On the road, 3.23 ERA. But of course, that ERA just ballooned a little bit on the road because he gave up 6 runs to the Yankees in his return to Yankee Stadium. Now, they know him pretty well. I wouldn't read into that start too much. Sevy's ERA was in the low 2s on the road before that. I think it was at least in the 2s. I don't have the exact number in front of me. Because now, originally I thought it was 2.19. Now my head's telling me 2.79. Does not matter. The point is, he had pitched well in 7 road starts before this game. So, you have the A's that want to trade him. You have the Mets as the team that got the most out of Sevy. And you could acquire him for nothing on a prospect side of things. It'd just be a matter of getting the money off their books. So how about you trade Paul Blackburn back to the A's and you take Sevy? That would clear a little bit of money from Blackburn in the deal to offset Sevy's contract. You could probably throw a decent prospect the A's way and get them to eat down more of that contract. Here's the problem with that, though. While I think it would make the Mets significantly better in the month of July to just make that trade right now, regardless of the bad numbers for Sevy this year. I really think you bring him in. I think he'd pitch better with the Mets than he did with the A's, and you get a much happier player for sure. It's where he wanted to be this offseason. Here's the issue. You'd have Senga, Minaya, Montas, Sevy, and Holmes all under contract next year, along with David Peterson. I know you can never have too much starting pitching, but you can't have too much starting pitching that ranges from $13 million at Holmes in the high teens all the way up to Minaya, who's over 20, and Sevy, who's over $20 million a year. Next year, Sevy will make $25 million. So that's the issue with trading for Luis Severino, is that you need the A's to eat a good chunk of change, I think. Not that the Mets can't afford him, but you don't want to be locked into that rotation, because if the rotation is the reason why you missed the playoffs this year, and then you're locked into all 5 of those guys, and that would be your move. That would be the deadline move, is getting Sevy. So I don't think the Mets are going to do that unless it's at the deadline and unless the A's kicking a lot of cash. So that means that there's not going to be a change to this rotation. This rotation is going to hold serve. They're going to stay internal unless they finally bring up Nolan McLean. And here's how I would do it. I know that Nolan McLean coming up and making his first start should be a significant thing for this fan base. It should be a moment that should be celebrated when the top prospect in the system comes up and gets to make a start. Here's what I would do, though. I would pitch him out of the bullpen this week, and here's why. He has done well in those situations. Frankie Montas went through Syracuse, and McLean pitched behind him in 2 outings and did well. I would, when Tidwell goes down, bring McLean up, because you will have an extra roster spot. So this is going to give you, if nothing else, guys that are going to end up on the 40-man roster anyway. Tidwell's already there. McLean's going to get on the 40 at some point. You'd be starting that clock early, but at this point, you have to think he might help you at some point this season anyway. So you have an extra roster spot to play with, because right now Tidwell is occupying a spot in a 5-man rotation. So you don't need 9 guys in the bullpen. What you do, well, actually, you would have them, because McLean would be in the bullpen to start. But what I would do is Tidwell pitches on Wednesday, send him down, you bring up Nolan McLean, and then you have McLean just in case you need an arm after David Peterson. If David Peterson looks bad for whatever reason, you'd have him. Otherwise, you would have him to piggyback Paul Blackburn at Citi Field against the Yankees. Now, it'd be a lot more fun to just start him, but I think they're going to give Blackburn a start because they want to see what he can do as a starting pitcher, and they're still going to say we haven't gotten a real look at it because of all these different circumstances. But if Blackburn goes out there and gives up 3 straight hits or whatever it is, or looks bad, you can go to some reliever to get out of that inning, and then you get McLean ready to go and you drop him into the game and see what happens. And if McLean pitches well and Blackburn does not, then awesome. You get rid of Blackburn, you stick McLean in the rotation, you go from there. If they both pitch well, no harm, no foul, you send McLean down. He ate up some innings for you when your team still needed it, and you bring up an extra bullpen arm, I guess, after he had pitched, And then when Manaea comes back, you dump whoever that bullpen arm is, and you roll with that rotation and see what happens. But you always then have McLean on the roster. So if Blackburn starts to pitch poorly again, you cut him and you have an internal solution. That's the biggest change the Mets can make right now, is finally calling on their top prospect. And that's what I would do. I would find a way to get him on the roster for this week and see what you got in a big league game. If it looks great, you might have to consider just letting the kid pitch in your rotation. And you know what? If he's able to handle that adjustment, keep a close eye on him. If nothing else, Nolan McLean can get you to the trade deadline when you make a bigger move. Or he might be the answer. You really never know. But you're not going to know until you call him up. And Paul Blackburn should be on thin ice at this point. It's crazy too. The Mets, for the same amount of money, let me make sure I'm right about this. I'm pretty sure that Paul Blackburn's making more or the same as Jose Quintana, and it's $4.05 million. Jose Quintana is making $4 million. Yeah. So by $50,000, Paul Blackburn is earning more than Jose Quintana this year. Now, that's hindsight being 2020. I'm sure the Mets thought that Quintana was going to cost $15 million for a one-year deal, or at least the $13 million he was making last year. But isn't that crazy? What a shame. But right now, this Mets team ultimately just needs the people inside that building to step up and play better. The things they can do, though, they can bring in an Alex Carrillo as a potential high upside guy to help that bullpen out. And they can look and see what Nolan McLean can do for this roster. Other than that, it's going to take some internal improvements. And again, the good news, you got to figure out the next 2 weeks. You know, if the Mets play 500 baseball for the next 2 weeks, I'm not even going to be mad at it. Win a series, lose a series. Who cares? Just do that. If you get to the deadline, you're still in pretty good shape. They're going to have a lot of reinforcements in the second half. Alvarez, Winker, Senga at some point, Raley. Those guys are really going to help this team. You just got to get to them. And we'll see how they do it. On tomorrow's show, I will be previewing Mets versus Brewers. It's funny because it doesn't look good on paper, but the Pirates did look good on paper. So maybe this is going to be a much better result. We will find out. I appreciate all of you for tuning in. If you wanted to see my greatest frustrations, I probably should have mentioned this early in the show, but I did do a live stream after the game. So you probably see it in your podcast feed or on the YouTube channel. You can check that out for my raw reaction to the Mets with their 30-4 loss against the Pirates across the series, the largest deficit in franchise history. So you can get me all fired up on that show if you missed it. And again, I'll have another show for you tomorrow morning previewing Mets versus Brewers. Thank you for listening. Make sure you follow, rate, and review wherever you get your podcast. Subscribe if you're watching on YouTube. If you want to be a Locked On Mets insider, find the link in the episode description to go to subtext.com/Locked On Mets. Thank you for making Locked On Mets your first listen, your first watch every day, not for your second watch. Check out Locked On MLB Game Night. Locked On MLB Game Night takes you through all the action in Major League Baseball with insight from some of our local experts. You can find Locked On MLB Game Night on the Locked On MLB YouTube channel, as well as the Locked On MLB podcast feed.